Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast. I'm Ryan, also known as Comic Stan. I love comic books. My co-host loves regular books, but I make him read comic books and then I make him talk about them in depth. And with me, as always, is my aforementioned amphibious co-host, it's Jamie.
Amphibious.
I'm so shocked you didn't match my enthusiasm and energy levels.
Hi, it's nice to see you.
I saw your face like twist and turn into like trying to feign enthusiasm. I was like, hi.
Hi, that was the most disingenuous hi I've ever done.
We get an A for effort at the very least.
Thank you, Dave.
We're not actors. We were never hired to be actors.
Someone hired you?
I mean, hired me, yeah.
Wait, you get paid?
Yeah, to pretend to do a podcast with you.
Oh, it's that. Right, yeah, that makes sense. I have heard about this.
Oh, that bit that we did.
That bit that we did where it turns out Jamie's actually needs carers.
This is a Fight Club scenario.
Right, okay.
And if you haven't seen Fight Club, don't worry about it.
Does it turn out that you're actually me, Ryan?
Or you're me.
Oh.
Or we're both the dog.
That's the most likely scenario.
Yeah.
The dog who's doing very well.
This is the wildest intro I think we've ever done.
I
think it's
right?
because I'm maybe... I don't know. Let's
you don't want to
it.
talk about the comic, do you?
I mean, ask me how I felt about the comic.
How did you feel about the comic?
I thought it was all right.
No, fuck off.
No, I fucking hated it.
It was awful.
It was really bad, and we're going to...
So
Creature of the Black Lagoon lives.
Yeah,
That's
so this
doing.
week we're talking about a Creature of the Black Lagoon comic. Ryan, I'm going to frame the credits as some questions that I ask you.
Okay.
I think this is just a fun, novel way of doing it.
Should I establish why we're doing this comic on this particular week?
Yeah, you should.
Well, we're doing it on this particular week because it's the last week of Spooky Season. Blah, 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 blah. It's a fish thing. Fish noises.
Zoidberg noises.
That Zoidberg noises is whoa, 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 whoa. That's
yeah, of course.
Sometimes you do a little like with his,
That's
with
the
his
one
things,
I was thinking.
But, yeah, but the more common was the "Did you see me escaping?" I was all like, whoa, 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 whoa.
So, Ryan.
Yes.
Is this from the same series as the Dracula comic we did last week?
It's from the same publisher, Image Comics,
Yeah.
part of Skybound, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's within the umbrella of, but it's written by different people. Written and art and everything by different people.
But it's part of that same like monster series thing they did,
yes,
isn't
it is, yeah.
Because the drop in quality has been startling.
Yes, I'd agree with you there.
So the last one had a fantastic art style.
Mm.
This had drawings.
At some moments of art I did like and appreciated. That's as far as I'm willing to go.
Okay. The last one had a story based on an iconic adaptation of Dracula from the 1930s.
Yes.
This had a story.
Yep. It's technically a sequel to a 1954 film, Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Yeah.
Or should I say, Creature of the Lackluster Lagoon.
The Lackluster Lagoon.
The Lackluster Lagoon is what I'm calling it now. Needless to say, it was pretty underwhelming based on the expectations I think we both had for having read Dracula.
It was a hot mess, dude.
It was just, it went from I'm kind of bored to, okay, now I'm aggressively angry at it. Like the nonsensical story towards the end. We're going to get into it. We're going to get into all of it, all 4 issues of it. If you don't want spoilers, I would say don't worry about it because it's not that good. So why bother worrying about it?
Yeah, no, we're almost doing a public service by spoiling this.
Yeah, if you haven't read it, just listen to this.
So
I think
Ryan,
we'll do a better job.
Who wrote it?
It was written by Dan Watters and Ram V. Now,
Right.
You won't know these people, I assume.
No, I don't.
Dan Watters I've not heard of. Apparently he's big in DC Comics. He's written a lot of stuff that I've not read any, or I couldn't see any that I'd read, so whatever. Ram V is an interesting one because I have read some of his work. He only a bit of Detective Comics, which is the Batman one that runs on Batman. Read a bit of that, and I found it very mid. And
right.
It's a really weird thing with Batman, like the main ones, when like they get writers onto these bigger titles, it always seems to go wrong, especially Batman. Like I said recently, Chip Zdarsky had a really all over the place run on Batman. And I love Chip Zdarsky, love his work, big fan. But I'll say that about his Batman run. Tom King, who I actually enjoyed his Batman run as well, like elements of it for sure. Very controversial. A lot of people didn't like it. So I understand.
That's the same with all of Tom King's work, though, I've realised. I know that you're a big fan, but he's very divisive, isn't he?
Yes, but I would, even by my metric of like his work, his Batman work does not touch like his best stuff with Supergirl and Vision and Mr. Miracle and of course Human Target.
Yeah.
But his Batman, I like that he took some like creative swings with Batman when he was on it.
So this is a guy who's written for Batman.
Yeah, he's big in DC. He's written a lot of stuff, and the only work of his that I've read, that I remember, is Detective Comics, and I found it quite mid. And I didn't pay any more mind. I was just like, fine, whatever. But then I would see news of like, oh, Ram V's writing this new line coming up or whatever, and people were excited for it. And I was like, really? Like
this guy?
So maybe I haven't read his best work. Maybe I've only read his work.
If this is his best work.
Well, exactly. So that's why I'm now like, maybe my initial assessment of his work was maybe a bit more correct. I don't know.
So Ryan, who drew it?
It was drawn by Matthew Roberts with color by Dave Stewart for the first 2 issues and Trish Mulvihill in the second 2 issues.
Cool.
And lettering by DC Hopkins.
What did you think of the art?
I thought the art was fine for the most part. Like it,
right.
But my first note, and I wanted to check with this early on first, and I guess we're starting with the arting now.
Yeah.
With the arting, walking down some stairs.
Oh, you got it in.
Remember that one. My first note, I don't know if you can see it from here.
No, but my eyes are...
It's jank face question mark.
Right?
Yeah. So I there was some parts I was like, I think that's jank. And then I would go a few panels and it would be fine. But then I would see someone be like, oh, that's something.
I am victorious, Ryan. You've started to identify
would
jank.
Not have identified with before our big kerfuffle with Spider-Man.
But you've started to see the jank.
I'm still less affected by it because if I was just reading this for my own whatever, then I probably wouldn't notice at all. But in a kind of assessment review kind of mind, I'm like, what's going on here?
So like I was in a pretty good place when I read this comic. Like
same.
I'd just gone on my lunch break at work. My lunch hour is sanctified time. I put my big headphones on. Generally I have my big headphones on. I'm like listening to some music or a podcast. I'm either like listening to classical music and reading a book, or I'm listening to a podcast or music with lyrics and like playing emulated Pokemon games on my phone. Like these are this is my happy time. This is the time where I get to step away from my job for an hour. Because I now work a job where I get lunch breaks. It's amazing.
Pretty good.
It's pretty fucking good. And I sat down.
You don't get lunch breaks here though.
No, I don't get any lunch breaks here. And I sat down with this, and I'll tell you what I was listening to. I was listening to a little bit of Tariega, one of my favorite Spanish guitar players.
Fancy.
I know, right? Man of culture. And I sat down, and I'm going to be honest with you. I had been reading Vagabond at my desk in between calls.
A much better, well, as we'll find out.
Yeah. So I was on a bit of a high because I'd just read a really great issue of Vagabond, and then I sat down with this, and I didn't even get angry at the art because the story was so bad.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even really have time to get angry at the art because it was secondary to how much I disliked everything else.
Yeah. But now that you have the time, what would you like to get angry about?
Jank face, baby. Yeah, so I say this all the time, but I don't know if I've actually said this on the podcast, but sometimes I feel that when comic book artists are drawing a character, they don't do enough character studies. And so the faces of the protagonist, particularly, because that's the person we see the most of, will come out looking different panel to panel. Like they just won't have really thought about, what happens if I look at this character, 3/4 turned, pulling a funny face? Can I draw them and have them recognizably look like themselves with that funny facial expression? And I don't think enough character studies happened here.
Do you think that jank face might be a sign of not spending as much time like working on the art? Like, is it a sign of just a quicker, like, just do this, it'll be fine, like they'll know who it is? Yeah,
because I don't think the artist was bad. Because the monster looked great.
Yes, that was one of my notes. Was I liked the creature. I'm going to talk about the history of the creature and everything later. And
yeah, because I know nothing about the creature from the Black Lagoon.
But the actual look of how they've done it here, I thought it looked quite vibrant. I loved looking at them, especially when they were in the water, murky water. I liked how dirty everything looked.
Yeah,
like that was like a good part. Like when you first see the main woman, whose name I've already forgotten, I won't remember, and I refuse to look up. But when you first see her hotel room, it looks grimy. And I'm like, fair enough.
One thing I couldn't work out, was she a journalist or a cop?
Journalist.
She was a journalist. She was a hack.
Mainly because I know she was talking to a publisher, editor at the beginning.
Yeah, well...
Or flashbacks.
Yeah, but I couldn't tell if it was an editor or like the chief.
I mean, it's similar. It could have easily been a cop. We'll get into the story in a bit, but it could have easily been the other one.
So I didn't like the way that she was drawn. Didn't like her character model. Jank face at points. despite enjoying the way that they're drawn the monster, which I know is kind of what we're here for anyway.
Good focus on like body proportions, like mid-swimming, underwater, like that was all good.
He was really well posed, wasn't he?
That was like, if you're gonna do one thing right, like that has to be it.
No, you are right. They got the thing they should have gotten right.
Yeah.
And the monster was always really well posed, and I liked the way it was drawn. But again, the art was just like, I know this is Image, not DC, but it felt
like a DC house style.
Didn't it look like the most sterile DC house style comic you've ever seen?
Yes. And it felt like that in some of the writing as well.
Worse than, I think. Worse than. Because they managed to write a horror comic with no suspense. There's not a single true moment of suspense here.
And also was all mostly in the daytime.
Yeah.
Like, this relates to the film, which, I mean, we'll get into in a bit, but I have the same problem with the film as well. A lot of it's in daytime. Fair enough, it's black and white. You don't notice as much. But when it's in daytime, it just looks less scary. And not even like, if we're talking about scary or not, just less interesting.
And again, I think we've had a couple of really great examples of how you can generate suspense in a horror story in a comic book. We talked about Dracula last week, and the glimpses we see of Dracula all build suspense, and the fact that we know who this character is and what we can expect from him, but we've not seen it yet. It's all very pregnant and suspenseful. Whereas this just had no element of suspense.
No.
I never really felt I suppose there was at points an impending sense of peril.
Should we say we're in story now? Because I ain't got anything else on the art.
Yeah, we're going to have to be, aren't we? Because I've already started. I'm sorry.
No, everyone, we're in story now, just so everyone knows. And full spoilers for why it fucking matters.
There's so many things that were wrong with it. So, to begin, we meet a character who has nearly been drowned, presumably by the monster from the Black Lagoon.
Should I say before story, just what's happened before this? Because this story is meant to be a sequel to the 1954 film.
Yeah.
So in 1954, there was a film called The Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Yeah.
And I watched the film.
Did you? Is it any good?
No. But it's not.
The film's not good.
But here's the thing, it's not. It's hard to describe because it's one of those things where films from those time, like they were released initially as entertainment. I think we're so far removed from that time period that they are just now historical pieces of entertainment. If that, then
I was about to say, how much of a grounding do you have in like golden age cinema?
Yeah, and I
because I don't have much.
I've only seen some bits, but to compare it as well, like the point of this film was to get this to film, if that makes sense. I was watching it, and there's just some parts just look awful, but it looks awful because we're in 2024, and this was 54. This is 70 years ago. So it's like I can't criticize it. Like there's parts where he's just swimming in the water, and it's just a guy in a suit in the water, which I will get into more in a bit. But the point is, nowadays, if it doesn't look good or realistic, we're like, well, what's the point then?
Yeah.
Back then, it was like, can we put this to film?
Yeah.
That was the main thing. It wasn't how good it looks. It's people just be impressed that we filmed this and are showing them a footage of it. Like that's what impressed people at that time. And then people were like, oh my God, it's a creature, like whatever. It's the same thing with like, have you heard the whole thing about like the first jump scare was a train that came like directly towards the screen?
Yeah.
And people were in cinemas like, oh.
Because it was impressive at the time.
Well, they'd never seen anything like that before. Like, especially back then, you weren't in front of a train when it was going. Like, most people weren't. So to be in a seated position, comfortable, have a train directly coming towards the screen, elicited a fear response from people because they're not used to it. Nowadays, we're like, unless someone's getting like brutally murdered, I'm not going to care. Like, that's like, we're desensitized compared to those people. So watching the film, I'm like, I can't assess it on if it's a good creature feature film or not.
Yeah.
But the reviews at the time said it was pretty mid. And that's
really?
What they said it was like a by the numbers monster film, which they had at those times. I mean, Dracula was like 31. So they'd had like, and Frankenstein was whenever around that time. It had been done already.
Yes.
But they just felt the need to make this one because they had an idea to make a film and then they made it. And a lot went into the creature design and stuff. And for the time, it probably was amazing. Like they had a guy on land and then a separate guy underwater because they needed like a really strong swimmer who could hold his breath for a long time to do these shots underwater. And also for 54, the underwater shots look great.
Yeah.
Like, for the technology and everything, it looks really good.
Because I imagine they didn't have waterproof cameras at the time.
I mean, they must have, because they filmed underwater.
Somebody must have developed one, yeah.
Exactly. And they filmed, like, from the bottom, like, looking up, like, at
That's pretty cool.
And so all that stuff is, like, really impressive, and I can like on that front. But in the same way that if I look like, again, like something in a museum, I'd be like, oh, it's really impressive they were able to do that at that time. I'm not like, oh, I'm losing my I'm mundled here from all the fucking...
I'm able to suspend my disbelief
for how good this is. Like, it was never that.
And again, you know, I am a purveyor of old things. I like elderly and vintage things.
Yeah,
and
it's quaint because it's old.
Exactly,
but that's different.
And you know, there's certain things that I find really interesting purely because it was the first time that somebody had done them.
Yes.
And so seeing underwater shots that are 54, so it is exactly 70 years old.
Exactly.
That is quite impressive. I don't necessarily think it warrants a mid-comic book sequel to an already not particularly well-received film from 70 years ago.
Well, here's the thing. I think anything can be good. Anything could be made good. Like, someone could make a great Creature of the Black Lagoon remake or reboot or whatever, like, today, and like get the core of the character and get it right, finally, whatever. But the problem here I'm having is Universal have just gone and looked at all the stuff they have the rights for within this kind of universe. They've gone, oh, we've got all these, we can make all of these things again, right? And apparently, all the dress is now, rather than the end of the last episode, there was a Dark Universe film planned for this. But then once the Mummy bombed, they were like, bollocks to this all. Like, let's just not bother. But here's the main point I was thinking when watching this. You had all these other monsters at the time who went on to become cultural touchstones.
Yeah.
Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, like all those. Creature of Black Lagoon did not take off at all.
Although the visage of the creature of the Black Lagoon, that like monster design is very familiar to me.
You recognize it, but it's nowhere near like, no one's dressing up as, and like, that's a bad example because that's a difficult costume to do or whatever. Yeah. But people don't mention like along the same lines as like those other monsters. Like, no one's talking about. I posit the Creature of Black Lagoon is the Aquaman of the monster universe. Only the diehard fans give a shit. No one else cares.
That's the title of the podcast.
Yeah. All right. The Aquaman of the monster universe.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that the two that keep coming up are Frankenstein and Dracula. And of course, they weren't new properties for a motion picture. They were adapted books.
Yeah. And yeah, I was going to make that point as well. Yeah.
And again, I think that really speaks to our habits as cinema goers, is that from day dot of Hollywood cinema, we have fucking loved an adaptation. Some of the biggest films of our generation were the Lord of the Rings and the Marvel films.
They were either adaptations or real life adaptation of real life events or fictional books. I think those are the biggest. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, one of the most critically acclaimed films of the past 10 years is probably Wolf of Wall Street. Or, you know, you look at recent films that have done really well in the box office. The film about fucking Jordan? Michael Jordan's shoes.
That didn't do particularly.
Did it not do well? I thought it did well.
Yeah. But if you go on that line, it's like Oppenheimer is like prime example.
Oppenheimer was a much better example. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, Oppenheimer.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, Oppenheimer, Wolf of Wall Street, and even in the 30s and 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. The big properties that people cared about were the books that their dads had read, which I just find that really interesting.
So I was going to make a point which I think explains it if you weren't going down this route already. But the other monsters being books already, I think they had much better foundations of being characters because they had all this other meaning and metaphors wrapped into them. We talked last week about Dracula being the Euroscepticism and that kind of thing. Frankenstein is about like man playing God, life and death, and like even like parental rejection and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's some really heavy themes of
Creature Black Lagoon was just made a film straight from the start. So it was literally just a script of like, how do we get a fish monster to be in a movie? Like, that was the goal. So I think that's why other monsters have like lasted for so long and become part of the culture is because they were rooted in all these like relatable fears and meanings and stuff. Creature Black Lagoon is just, you know, I'm going on keep going. The Creature Black Lagoon could be replaced by a really quick crocodile or a good swimming bear. Do you know what I mean?
And we've had that movie.
Yeah.
It's called Jaws.
Exactly.
And it's fucking fantastic.
The only difference, Creature Black Lagoon would be Jaws if Jaws could climb up the ladder and get on the boat. That's the only difference.
Which, in fairness, would have made that a more terrifying film.
Exactly. And I tell you what as well, and this,
God, you really didn't like this comic book, did you?
It's not even that. The comic, I'm like, oh, a bad comic, like, whatever.
Yeah.
But when I then watched the film, and I was like, I see now why no one gives a shit about Creature Black. Do you know what his name is? Do you know what the creature's name is?
Gerald.
He's called Gillman.
Gilman,
yeah.
Mr.
And if
Gilman.
if ever there was a turn the name into a surname, it's Gilman.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the reason that Gilman sucks is because he's ultimately just a guy in a suit. And I know you can reduce other monsters in the same way. You can say Frankenstein's a guy in a suit. You can say Wolfman's a guy in a suit, whatever.
Yeah.
But they had other things about them as well. Like, like I said, Frankenstein was a corpse sewn together and reanimated. Wolfman is anyone could turn into the Wolfman at any time.
Yeah.
Like, Creature Black Gilman is just Gilman. He's just a guy in a suit. And the reason that phrase specifically got in my head was I actually watched another YouTuber talking about The Thing, John Carpenter's film. And apparently when they were making that, and have you seen The Thing?
No.
It's fantastic. I will see you down to watch The Thing at some point. It's one of the best horror films I've ever seen. Okay. It's from the 80s. But in that film, one of the things it's most well known for is its prosthetic effects and practical effects. Yeah. And it has this gore where like creatures are turning into and morphing into and, you know, other stuff, whatever. And it's like, there's like early on, it's not spoilers, it happens very early on, dogs get caught up in the thing and they kind of get absorbed by it. And then at one point you see like, it's halfway through absorption. You see the dogs are like halfway in it and they're still alive and they're being absorbed and stuff. But it's the effects look amazing, especially for the time, mainly because the guy who did the effects, he got crunched really, you know, like video game crunch. Like, he was like, I was sleeping at the effects place, like I almost went insane like making this film, and we're like, thanks for your service because it looks really good. But the main thing is that someone was talking to John Carpenter about that and how they were striving to do all this stuff, and he said there was actually The Thing film from like the 50s or something, and it's just a guy in a suit. The film is literally there. It's the same setting. They're in a North Pole research station. Yeah. They find an alien. In the 80s one, the alien is like a thing that transforms and could be any one of them. In the 50s one, it's just a guy in a suit.
Yeah.
And John Carpenter was like, I like the setting. I wanted to do the story right. It could not just be a guy in a suit.
Yeah, totally.
And that's Gilman. Gilman is just a guy in a suit.
Yeah, no, and so I see what the story was going for with this misdirect. So there is a dude who's involved in some cartel shit in the Amazon.
Yeah.
Who you are led to believe the main character believes is the person drowning everyone.
Yes. Because he was drowning people in America. Apparently.
He was doing the odd drowning.
Almost drowned the protagonist, which I did like was a bold first panel. A woman being drowned right on her face, and you see the hands on her throat. Yeah. Really striking image. And that literally saw that first page. I was like, ooh, this is something. Yeah. And then like 2 or 3 pages, I was like, oh, this sucks now. It was a good start. It was a really good start. But yeah. But you were saying.
And so they tried for this misdirect, but I found the protagonist annoying.
Yeah, I didn't connect with any of the characters because I found them all just pieces of exposition. Yes. Exposition tools. That's all they were.
They were.
You know how I'll make notes when I'm reading comics, and sometimes it's really cool bits I like, sometimes it's art I really like.
Was all of this just exposition?
It's just examples of, like at one point she goes, "It's you, Collier. Show yourself." While she's alone, sneaking into an area with people with guns, and she still has to vocally, and not only she's vocally talking to herself to tell the audience what she's thinking. Yeah. And I would slightly more excuse that if that was the only way that this writer could get exposition. Anyway, but they also do narration. They're doing the 2 worst things for exposition. Yeah. And they do them both when one would just eliminate the other. They're like, no, we're having both really bad storytelling techniques
in
this comic.
Both of the poor expositional tools, please.
Exactly.
Sir.
And I remember...
I want bread and pasta.
No, but those are good things. That's the problem. This is like, do you want shit or shit? Like, What's the difference? Well, there's slightly different versions of shit. Like, well, give me both. But I noticed as well, there was loads of exposition, and then it got to a point where there was narration again, and I went, hang on, is this narration in this? And I went to start, I was like, so there was narration right at the start, but I was fine with that because it was like a flashback opening intro kind of thing, and I thought, if you do it now, and don't do it again, that's fine. Like, I'll take that. But then they did it again. I was like, you bastards. God damn you.
It was piss weak, wasn't it? It was piss weak. And I think I agree with you. There was no depth to any of the characters beyond their value as an expositional tool.
Yeah.
I think that there wasn't even really an attempt made to create suspense in that story. Like that moment where she's walking through, she chases somebody through the Amazon. Already dumb.
Yeah.
Don't run into the fucking Amazon with no kit. She literally had a pack of smokes and a bottle of Valium. Yeah. And that's what she took into the Amazon with her.
But the thing is, I can also take, again, like there's a good version of anything. And I could take a story where a character, you're following a protagonist who's so obsessed with something that they're making irrational decisions or bad choices. Like, I'm interested in that story. Like, let's say, but this is just bad writing. It doesn't justify enough. Like, that's...
But so that moment where she's kind of hacking through the Amazon and she says, "Oh, Gillman, it's you," whatever that guy's name is. It's not Gillman.
Collier is the serial killer. Gillman is the one with gills.
That is supposed to be the suspenseful moment where she is either going to be met with a serial killer or a murderous monster, and there is not a hint of suspense in that moment.
Yeah, I'm just like, what's happening next?
Yeah, totally. And this is, we're sort of halfway through issue 3 at this point, aren't we? So we're in the third act.
At what point is she going through, like, it happens a lot. Like, she's going through the Amazon. Maybe there's people with her. Maybe there's not.
And then she has the weird flashback and everything's just sort of okay. There's no suspense. And so it fails as a horror story. It fails as a horror story. And when you have a story like this, what else is there?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I tell you what as well. One thing in the film that they're continuing here, which I don't think was a good thing to continue, is in the film, the Gillman is obsessed with the one female member of the crew that's trying to find him, right? So also as weird in the film is, he's kind of being hunted by this group who are like, he's like a never before found monster. Yeah. Like, let's, and there's a bit of a disagreement with these two guys. One of them is like, hey, if we capture him alive, we could learn a lot from him. And, like, let's not kill him, even though he's killed us, a couple of ours, but he's a wild animal, whatever. Yeah. The other guy's like, I want to sell this corpse for money. Yeah. Like, that's but they are hunting him down.
And there is that guy in the comic book who's like, oh, I'm going to get a Nobel Prize for this. This will be my entry back into the scientific community. And he's the one who's been paying top dollar for all the corpses that he's been drowning to, like, open up the lungs and look at the mud or whatever. And again, it's sort of, this fails because it doesn't do the thing that I think horror does at its best. So when we were talking about Dracula, we got to have what I thought was a really interesting conversation about British Euroscepticism.
Yeah.
And sexuality and the function of sexuality in society and the function of sexuality in a story. If we were talking about Frankenstein today, we'd be having a conversation about nature versus nurture.
Which is also why I did suggest
doing
Frankenstein as well.
Yeah, no, I know.
Something good to
and it was my decision not to do that because I felt that it was important that we shine the shitty spotlight on this bad comic.
Yeah, appropriately shit on this bad comic.
Because, Frankenstein has really interesting things to say about the sort of the burgeoning Victorian obsession with psychology and nature versus nurture and how we were just starting to kind of have those conversations at the time. And it is a really interesting text for that reason. Here it's like a monster that drowns people is bad.
Yeah.
That's the subtext here. There is no meaningful subtext. And so as a horror story, it doesn't function.
No. And the reason it doesn't have that good subtext is, again, because it's not based on a book. It's not based on a novel that someone like a really intelligent storyteller crafted and put all this extra meaning and stuff in. It's just, we need a story so we can get Gillman on screen. Like, that's it. But it's even worse here because they've continued the same. They've made it, and if anything else, it's a appropriate sequel to the film. Because in the film, Gillman just kills all the men, but he just he focuses on the woman and just like watches her from afar. Like at one point she's swimming and he's swimming under her. She doesn't know he's there.
I've seen
but
that
he's just
scene.
watching her.
Yeah.
Great film scene. Like again, for 54, like amazing that they made that at all. So they've continued that here where Gillman is, because I read the comic and then I watched the film. Maybe there was the wrong order. I don't know. But when he rescues the woman at the beginning of the first issue, I'm like, why didn't he kill her? And then I'm like, okay, maybe there's a thing. Like maybe we'll find something out. But it turns out Gillman he likes women. He hates and kills men, and he likes women. And that's that. I think they're trying to do like a King Kong thing with him. But then here's the problem. Like as I was saying, he's more sympathetic than he should be as a character. Yeah, because he's meant to be the scary in the forest, like he's gonna get you kind of thing. And then you're like, man, so many people after Gillman. Like they're trying to get him. Like someone trying to capture him, someone trying to kill him and sell his body. Like, like fair enough. He's defending himself, you know. And then we're not in a horror anymore. We're in the Shape of Water or something. Like it's all like a Bigfoot thing where the Bigfoot's like a positive character. What's the American sitcom? It was like or film where it's like they rescue Sasquatch and put him in a house, and Harry and the Hendersons. Yeah, it's like that. But this is meant to be presented as like Dracula, Frankenstein, Gillman. It just doesn't work.
It's piss weak.
I'll tell you what I did see. I took a picture of. There was a great art, which speaking about tension and stuff. I really like this one panel. It's a close-up of Gillman's eyes, and it actually looks somewhat disconcerting.
Yes.
Really well
I
done.
like that panel as well.
I'm highlighting this one good bit of this comic.
Again, the panels where we see Gillman, he's well drawn. And there is good anatomy there, and he's posed really well. And that final scene of him just like his eyes just popping out of the water.
Yeah.
That was quite good. I would have that as a piece of art up on my wall.
And how much better would that be if he was a ruthless killing machine?
Exactly. If he was Predator.
Yeah, that put everyone on the back foot and was like they're running away from, like, imagine like Terminator in the Amazon. Yeah. With Gillman as the Terminator.
Totally.
Like, something like that. And like she's escaping Gillman, and then she runs through the narcos, and the narcos are like, who the fuck are you? And like really panicking. She's like, no, there's something worse. Like, I'm not scared of you and your guns because there's something worse coming. Like, that would have been great. And instead, talking about the overall story, I realized something just before we started recording. I think you could take out Gillman of this story. Yeah. And it would all mostly happen the same.
Yeah.
And
if anything, it would be more impactful because it's one woman journalist alone in the Amazon with a bunch of narcos with guns.
Well, that's
quite a cool story.
Let's break it down, right? This specific story without Gillman, right? Yeah. What would happen? Woman she's in Peru. Yeah. She's hunting down Collier, serial killer, who's escaped because she was chasing him. Yeah. She tracks down the bodies that are turning up in the rainforest. Yeah. She finds a guy who's examining the bodies. For whatever reason, like, all right, maybe they're not there. Maybe the researcher guy who was in that character was actually in the film. I saw him get clawed by Gillman in the film, and then he's that guy. But so he's not there. She runs into someone else, like a local who's there, whatever. She realizes Collier is working with the narcos, so he's protected. So she's like, you know what, fuck this. We're gonna get some guns and we're gonna get him. They track him down to his cave. Turns out he's killed that guy and strapped a bomb to him. Yeah. The bomb goes off. Collier kidnaps the woman because he's found unconscious. He's going to do horrible shit to her. Doesn't matter. And I'm going to get to that fucking point later as well. No. But he's about to do horrible shit to her, but the locals that she's teamed up with rescues her, kills Collier, and they leave, and that's it. That would be the story if Gillman wasn't there. That's the story, isn't it?
It's functionally the same story, yeah.
But in this version, Gillman's there sometimes.
It's like they couldn't even make him the centerpiece of his own story. A story that was created entirely so that he could be in the water in the Amazon killing people.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell you what as well, there's a bit towards the end which really pissed me off as well, right?
Go on.
The reveal is Collier he's not just a serial killer who's drowning people. He's obsessed with he's obsessed with Gillman and the air stuff. He didn't go there because of Gillman.
No.
He went there and then realized there was a Gillman there, and he was like, I like this. He drowns people, I drown people. We've got loads in common. But he becomes obsessed with it. He talks about it like he's a god of the swamp or whatever. And then he reveals himself, right? How would you describe what did you think the story was when he reveals what he looks like at this point?
Well, I mean, there wasn't really anything going on.
I mean, he looked like he was turning into a Gillman.
Oh, I see. Right.
Did you not
I see
catch
your
that?
point. Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from. Yeah.
So what did you think was happening at that point?
Well, yeah, I suppose him turning into a Gillman, yeah.
Right. But like, did you think about, or did you, I mean, I'm not saying you should have had like as much investment into this to be like, I wonder what happens next. Like, because that's asking a bit much of this comic.
I was just sort of skimming through it, mate.
That's what I mean. So fair enough. I immediately was like, okay, what's happening here? He's turning into a Gillman. Are we going to find out how that is, right? Yeah. And he has parts, he looks like parts of Gillman are coming through his body, right? It then reveals in the next issue that he'd been finding discarded pieces of Gillman.
Yeah.
So he's shedding bits of himself and sewing them onto himself, right? If you look at that first reveal, I think everyone else would never have guessed that was what was happening.
Yeah.
Because, and not to say that's a bad concept, but the image and the concept are really far apart.
They're quite disparate.
The image looks like he's turning into a Gillman, like he's like ingested something or he's been infected by something. He looks like a werewolf kind of mid-transformation, right? The concept of him sewing pieces of a monster onto himself is a good horror thing, but is not represented by the art at all, right? It would have been good if the reveal, and he had like bloody sewn pieces on his body, right? And looked really fucked up. And it was all like asymmetrical and disorganized. He had perfect it looked like a natural thing. Like it looked like he was going through Gillman puberty. But like
Gillman puberty.
But it looked like a natural thing that was happening, right?
Yes.
So they were like, look at this. And I'm like, ugh, that's pretty horrific. It's like, this is how it happened. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like I feel like I'm nitpicking, but that's what happens when you don't enjoy it and then it just presents you some shit and you're like, well, hang on, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But it should have been like a bloody, like what's the old thing, like a serial killer who's like sewn people together or whatever, like a human centipede kind of thing, or a Frankenstein.
Like Frankenstein's monster.
Like a shoddy made, self-made Frankenstein. And that would have had a bigger impact and it would have been a scarier image.
Yes.
And instead we got like this guy who is a random serial killer must have the most amazing surgical sewing techniques and on himself without anesthetic. Amazing
without
job.
anesthetic or an operating theatre.
Yeah. You could be a plastic surgeon, man. You don't need to do this. Like you could be doing facelifts and
Brazilian butt lifts,
fake tits. Like you would be amazing at that. Like you did this on yourself.
You don't need to be fucking harvesting heroin it wouldn't be heroin in the Amazon. It would be cocaine, wouldn't it?
Cocchiano.
It would be cocchiano.
Yeah. But if he went into a plastic surgeon's and they were like, well, what's your resume? And he just took off his shirt. They were like, bloody good. Like I don't know why you did that, but great job.
Solid work, sir.
Amazing.
Do you have any more monster bits?
Exactly. So yeah, I that was a point that I took a lot of umbrage with.
Just the whole, to be honest with you, it didn't annoy me as much as it annoyed you.
Oh yeah, no, exactly.
It got to you, didn't it?
Yeah, and I'm to be honest, I should give its credit, give its dues. I much prefer reading this than a really mid, like a comic that we just say it was fine is the worst to review.
Yeah. Oh, it's so difficult finding something to say, isn't it?
Yeah. I get a lot more, like when I was reading that part, I can't wait to talk about this on the podcast. Because I suggested to you, like, let's do 2 issues of this and 2 issues of Frankenstein. The reason we're not doing Frankenstein is because there's only 2 issues out. I was like, well, there's no point doing half of 2 of 4. So I was like, let's do 2 of this and 2 of Frankenstein, and we could do like a monster double bill or whatever. And then you were like, well, let's just do it all. Like, we get it kind of done out of the way. We're in it now. And I was like, fine. But I'd already then, I was like, well, I want to know what happens. Not in I try and think of this like a judge of like a good story is, do you want to know what happens next? Like, is it, are you invested at all, right? But then you can go the other extreme. But like, this is so bad. I just want to know what they do in the next in the last 2 issues.
I need to know where this goes now.
Yeah. And then I read that and I was like, and then you suggested, I was like, thank God, because I need to talk. Because otherwise I would have been like, I know we said we weren't going to do this, but I've got to talk about it.
But I've got to talk about it.
Yeah. So thank you for giving me the platform.
It was just a hot mess. That's the thing. It was just a hot mess.
It was just over exposition for like no reason.
And again, I have a lot of love for a bad movie. Have you ever heard of Trolls 2?
I've heard of it. Yeah. I've seen the scene. Oh no, they're eating him.
Yeah.
And they're gonna eat me next. Oh no. That's a great scene.
So I love Trolls 2, right? Terrible film.
The one we always go back to is The Room, obviously. The Room's a great watch.
The Room is fantastic.
Hello, doggy. So
the biopic about The Room is really great as well.
Yeah.
And you know, Edward's stuff, Glenn and Glenda, Plan 9 from Outer Space, all fantastic. You know, great schlocky shitty films. The problem is, when it comes to comic books, bad comic books aren't entertaining in the same way that bad films are.
Here's the thing. I had a similar thought to you. But then when we got this, I'm now starting to think, no, there are actually some. I think what it is...
Well, did you find this so bad it was entertaining?
Oh, yeah. I love shit on it. Like, that's the thing.
Right. Like, well, yeah, but I don't love bad films because I can shit on them. I love them because there is like something really charming in how bad they are.
Yeah, and there's a difference, absolutely. Like I see what you mean, because I've said about The Room before. It's like you can't replicate that magic with The Room because you have to have that magic of the funding and the resources, but you also have to have someone who has this vision that they really believe is amazing, but they are making all the wrong decisions.
And The Room is kind of amazing. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of incredible.
That's different from like a Transformers sequel where it's like, who gives a shit now? Or,
like, have you seen Mulholland Drive?
Yeah, bits of it. I haven't seen it all the way through, but yeah.
It's fantastic. It doesn't make a lick of fucking sense from A to B.
Well, I've talked about David Lynch before to people because I feel like I don't get David Lynch. But you speak to some fans and they're like, oh no, there is meaning. You just have to like dig in and understand. I'm like, am I too stupid for David Lynch?
No, I think you're approaching David Lynch wrong.
Yeah, probably.
Because Eraserhead's fantastic. Doesn't make a lick of fucking sense. Mulholland Drive, incredible film, does not make a lick of fucking sense.
Do you know what film he did do? He directed the 80s Dune film.
Yeah.
Which does make sense because he had a book to...
He also did a TV show.
Twin Peaks.
Twin Peaks, which is really fantastic.
I really enjoyed Twin Peaks, but...
Twin Peaks is great.
Again, I would hear like the proper Lynch fans talking about, oh, this one scene was amazing. I was like, I had no idea what was happening in that scene. Like, I was confused, but in a way I was like, well, it's Lynch. Like, I wasn't like, oh, what's going on? But
compared to Mulholland Drive, Twin Peaks is actually pretty grounded.
It starts off grounded. I mean, do you see the return?
Yeah, it just gets chaotic.
It gets way overboard.
But like, yeah, I remember. So shout out to my buds. I won't say their names, but they'll know who they are. You also know both of these guys,
right?
They were two lads, lived together, had the same name. It was a rite of passage that we would all hang out on their house on like a Friday, Saturday night because they had a nice big house when we were in our early 20s, and so it was just the spot that we all went to. And it was a rite of passage that they would sit you down at pre-drinks or after you'd been drinking, and we would either watch Mulholland Drive or The Room. So I've seen both multiple times because of those two guys. And like, just watching somebody who'd never interfaced with David Lynch before, a few drinks deep, getting ready to like hit the bar, watching Mulholland Drive was fucking glorious.
I can imagine. I mean, that's definitely the worst way to first attempt to take in some Lynch stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for what probably might be the last bit we mentioned on the Creature of the Lackluster Lagoon.
So the film, the 1954 film, came out to lukewarm reviews.
It was like, I think people were like, it's fine. Like, it wasn't even bad, but it was fine.
Does it now have a cult following?
No, I don't think. Not I've seen.
So there's not even really a big cult following for it.
It's more examined as like, again, like a piece of history.
Yes.
Like, look, all this underwater filming they did for the first time, like that kind of stuff.
And I'm interested on things on that level. I am. I'm a weird little nerd, and so I am interested in things on that level. But I mean, again, somebody should have had a glance over this comic book after it was made and gone, there's probably no point printing this.
I think Universal, the commissioned Image, they were just like, we want a comic.
Yeah.
Like, this is they're several years, they're 5 years removed. Well, so they started Dracula last year. So let's say they're 4 years removed from the official cancellation of the Dark Universe.
Yeah.
They're like, we're not doing anything else with these characters. Let's do something.
But the Dracula comic was really good.
Dracula comic was really good. But I also suspect if you're dishing out the assignments, like, who wants Dracula? Like, a bunch of writers, like, yeah, I'll love Dracula. And they gave it to, I forgot to mention this last week, the guy who wrote Dracula comic, James Tynion IV, he wrote Nice House on the Lake.
He did mention it, yes.
I forgot. I don't think I mentioned it at all last
You did
week.
mention it, and the art makes a lot of sense within that context.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
But so when someone's like, who wants to do Dracula? And people are like, yes, yeah, absolutely. Like, who wants to do Frankenstein? Like, oh, I'd love to. I got a great idea for Frankenstein. And then they're like, who wants to do Creature of the Black Lagoon? They're like, I could do with the job.
And there's that one weird dude in the corner who's like, Gillman, yeah, I'll write Gillman.
I fucking love Gillman.
I fucking love Gillman, mate.
You know what I imagine Gillman is
Gillman?
Gil
How
from
did I not know he was called Gillman?
Gil
Gil.
from yeah,
Simpsons.
old Gil from this. Oh, Gil's he's gonna kill a few people tonight. He's gonna be a big lucky breaker. Oh no, I've been hit by a harpoon. Oh, it's not Gil's day. That's who I imagine Gilman is now. But he is the Aquaman of the Dark Universe.
He is the Aquaman of the Dark Universe, Ryan. It's very fitting.
I'll tell you what I found as well, which I wanted to make a point on. At the end of the first issue, there's a bit, same with Dracula, there's a bit at the end of the issue written by the writers. So like, Tiny in the Fourth, he made a point of like, I can't remember when I first heard of Dracula. And that's like a good thing, because then it makes you think like, these are characters that's always been in our lives, and you don't remember even when you first realized or learned about them. So there's a little bit of writing here, and I want from both the writers. 2 writers on this, by the way.
Yeah, I know, right?
How is there 2?
I'd love to hear the conversations that happened in that writer's room.
Who did what, and why did it take? Why did it take 2 of you?
Yeah, this is it, isn't it?
But Ram V writes about writes about the Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Yeah,
and I read this, and I want to bring this up. Right, I'm just gonna. It's a quite a few paragraphs. I'm just gonna mention 2. Right, he says. To me, the creature from the Black Lagoon has always been one such mirror. He's talking about mirrors to society and other films, or whatever.
Right.
An enigma, a narrative singularity into which we pour endless human ambitions, regrets, and desires in the hope that we shall see them reflected, our struggles witnessed and acknowledged, our darkness feared. The creature was never about being afraid of the unknown. It was always about being afraid of ourselves. I think he's talking absolute bollocks.
Yes,
I think that doesn't mean anything we said there.
None of it means anything.
We are pretty pretentious lot, you and I, to always be trying to like, ooh, the double meaning here, and like, ooh, maybe there's this elevated metaphor meaning, whatever. I think that's bollocks what he's just said.
That is language for the sake of having something to print.
Exactly. And again, in the original film, there's a slight element of like nature. Like, again, like Jaws, like even like films like the Anaconda films, or to an extent even like Sharknado and stuff like that. But like this core
Sharknado.
But it has this core concept of like there's nature and you shouldn't mess with it. Like and there's things that you don't understand, and like bloody Moby Dick. Prime example. Like this
Man v Nature.
The film has a kind of Moby Dick element. But the problem is the monster is humanized.
Yes.
Which makes him less of a scary creature, but also then because they're humanized, it's like, okay, well, they murdered some people, so they're not a scary force of nature. It's a guy who's just killed people, who lives in the Amazon lagoon and killed a few people, but also fancies the woman and tries to kidnap her at one point. Like, it just becomes like, what are we doing here? Like, what's the appeal? Like, this guy could be replaced with a uncontacted man who lives in the Amazon who swims really good
so easily.
Yeah, the fact that he breathes underwater is pretty irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like, for the most part.
It's just not that interesting, is it?
No, exactly. And again, he wasn't based on a novel or anything. The film was just an excuse to get Gillman on the big screen. Yeah. But now people are trying to assign meaning to it. There's like, oh no, Gillman represents the mystery of and our own fears. It's like, no, he's a fish monster. That is all he is.
He's a crappy fish monster.
And again, you could do something good with this. I'm not saying that Gilman's such a shitty character. He has less meaning than other characters, who are then therefore easier to write for and write with. But Gillman needs something more. I think he needs to be like a violent force of nature.
Even if the story had been largely the same, but they'd gotten the bread and butter stuff right of making me care about the protagonist a bit more, this would have been quite enjoyable.
Yes. And again, like a relatable character, protagonist, who was running away from the monster would have been a way better like thing. Like,
and that's so bread and butter. That's so bread and butter.
But simple can be effective.
Exactly.
And this wasn't even simple.
No. And it was simple. It was incredibly basic without any of the charm of simplicity.
And by the time we got to the end, and it's like a little narrative, like as she's riding away in the boat, I literally made the note. If I read, the water has changed me one more fucking time. Like, how? Why?
I'm drawn to the water.
Yeah.
No, you're not.
I nearly drowned it. The water's in my system, whatever. It's like, yeah, that's, you spit it up and then you're fine.
Yeah.
Like,
Cough it up, love.
You're not part water now. Like, they're trying to make a metaphor and it just doesn't apply.
Would you like to hear an interesting historical factoid?
It's better than talk about the comic, I guess.
You know the expression blowing smoke up my ass?
Yeah, heard it.
Do you know where that comes from?
Obviously I do, but for the listeners who might not know.
So, a rogue Victorian doctor decided that because smoke was lighter than water, less dense than water, you took somebody who was drowning and blew a bunch of smoke up their ass, the smoke would rise through their body, forcing the water out, and they'd cough it up and they'd survive.
That's pretty interesting.
It's quite interesting. Tried it once. By chance, as he was doing it, the person coughed up all the water. And so for a little while, they just assumed that is how you stop someone from drowning. And so you'd pull somebody out of the river while they were drowning and somebody would get
his trousers off.
Literally, yeah. Someone would get his trousers off, take a big old whack out of a pipe, blow it into some bellows, stuff them up their arsehole and fill their arsehole full of smoke. And it never fucking worked. And that is where the expression, "Are you blowing smoke up my arse?" comes from. Because it's like, oh, are you telling me something that isn't true?
And just like the last week with the blood transfusions and Dracula, like they could have done that in this comic. It could have been an allegory for Gilman. It's like, quick, blow smoke up his ass. Like, you're just killing them. Like,
exactly.
It's not working.
Like, this would have made it so much more interesting.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of things would have made this more interesting.
So,
I'll tell you what as well, in terms of not even talking about the comic anymore, but in terms of like end of year awards, I worry sometimes, like, because we were saying earlier about comic book quality, right?
Yeah.
And like, we normally don't get bad comics, we get mid comics.
Yeah.
And then we talk, and like, we try and make it interesting, but like, why is it mid? What could have been better? What's missing?
The worst we tend to get these days, and we are way more selective about what we read now.
Yes.
Is a big swing and a miss.
Yeah. And I don't want to pick out bad comics just to shit on them.
No.
But I'm glad we've done this because now we have a clear worst of the year.
We have a stinker
for the end of the year.
We have another the ones.
I'm making a worst creature of the Black Lagoon category, and the winner is Gilman. It's the only winner.
We haven't had many stinkers this year. It's been overwhelmingly. It's either been one of us feeling really positive for something and the other one having more of a sort of nonplussed response. Yeah. Either way. Or it's been something that we're both really excited about, or it's been something that has been kind of average that we've been able to have a semi-interesting conversation about. This is just bad. Yeah. On every level.
I've got a theory with quality of comics overall and like the larger kind of entertainment industry.
Yeah.
I think that the reason we don't get as much like big highlighted bombs in comic books is because, I mean, we do to an extent with like Spider-Man stuff, like people are shitting on this latest Spider-Man for years now because they've been making really horrible decisions. We talked about it, I've written about it. There's some of it there. But I think the reason we get a lot less of it here as opposed to other mediums is because there's overall less money in comic books.
Yeah.
But the reason I think you have like studios interfering with like films, TV, video games, music is because there's a lot they pump money into it, and then you've got people who are not creative at all trying to make it as like safe a bet for return as possible.
Yes, absolutely.
And either you then get things getting midded to hell, or you get big box office bombs like Joker 2 recently, where people are just like, why did you do this? Like, but because there's not as much money in comics, that's why we don't get as much of that.
Yeah.
And that's why if we were doing any other medium, I'd be inclined to do like big failures to like dissect some stuff. I don't think we get that in comics as much, so we don't seek them out at all.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of the sum of it. Really.
And we genuinely don't seek out bad stuff. If anything, because we are both adults with jobs and, lives and pets and a limited amount of time, we sincerely seek out stuff that one or both of us is excited to read, don't we?
Yeah, I want to be excited to talk about stuff.
Yeah, and absolutely. I don't come into this on a fucking Monday. We record as well. Like it's essentially winter in Britain now. So Ryan and I are I'm trudging through the rain to get to Ryan's house to sit down and talk about comic books, and we're using one of our evenings in the week to do so. We have no interest in turning up to be angry at something.
Yeah.
We want to talk about why we're excited about comic books and why we enjoy the medium and, what's good at the moment and what's interesting and what potentially is going to do really well when it gets translated to film. Human Target.
Yeah.
That's what we want. And yeah, it's sometimes a bit sad when I just sit through an hour of reading something really shitty.
Yeah. It's not, yeah. It's worth doing, I think, every once in a while to kind of flex those muscles of
yes.
So it's one thing to explain why something's good and why something's works. I think it's entirely something else to be why is this bad?
Why have I had such a lukewarm response to this thing?
You know who's gave the advice for budging writers where it said, if you want to become a good writer, you don't read good stuff, you read bad stuff.
Stephen King?
Alan Moore.
Alan Moore.
He'd said that. So, and I think that's really interesting here because we get that same kind of thing of why is this bad? If you were wanting to become a comic book writer, I think looking at stuff like this, why is this so bad? Then you can avoid those things if you make something yourself.
We shall.
So I think that's pretty much it for the comic. We could talk about stuff we've read, or we could. There's been a few kind of updates in movie and comic book stuff that we could go over a little bit as well.
So, I can tell you about something I'm reading at the moment, which I alluded to earlier.
We're going content consumption corner.
Yeah. I've been reading Vagabond.
Yes, you did mention.
So Vagabond is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a manga. It's a manga about Miyamoto Musashi, who is a Ronin samurai from the Tokugawa era. And so it's kind of semi-autobiographical, semi-historical. I'm 50 odd issues in, which is more than I would read of anything for the podcast. It's fucking excellent, Ryan.
So you're saying we're going to have to do an episode of it at some point?
Yeah, but I'm going to need you to it's going to be one of those long burns where it's I need you to read all 300 issues with me, bud. Do you know what I mean? I need you to get into it with me. Because there was a run recently where 4 issues was one fight. One spot, and it wasn't even a fight to the death. It was a sparring match where one guy had a blunted spear and the other guy had a wooden sword. And it was super suspenseful and really interesting and really highlighted all of the characters' flaws, but also everything that makes him somebody that you really want to keep reading about. And that took place over the duration of time of this whole run. And so again, it's one of those things with manga. And I think actually this is the first time since reading Dragon Ball as a kid, scandal noted.
Yeah.
Whereby
multiple scandals.
I've really sunk my teeth into a manga and read more than the 5 to 10 issues that we read for the podcast. And I'm I don't think we're doing manga justice.
Oh, of course not.
By talking about it having read so little, because the good ones are slower burns. They are. The good ones are slower burns, mate.
Yeah, and again, but even there's there's normal comics like that. One that we said that we might be doing for episode 100, which we won't spoil yet, but it's quite a few issues in. But it's one we're very big on, so we're going to have to judge how much of this can we read and catch up on.
It's something we're both really passionate about, isn't it?
Exactly.
Can't believe we're nearly at 100 episodes.
I know.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of things happened.
There are podcasts that I love that I've listened to a bunch of times because they didn't make it to their 100th episode, and so you just have to We did it, bro. We fucking did it.
We sat down and we just kept talking.
When's episode 100?
It's in December, so it might literally be 100th episode, Christmas episode, awards, and then best of. So
because we started releasing quite early in the year, didn't we? In
February, I think.
Was it February
2023? Yeah,
February 23.
I think so. Yeah.
Wild. No, I think it was 22.
Yeah. No, because I moved back in mid 2022.
Yeah, so we started
recording
recording around this time 2 years ago.
Yeah.
we've been doing this together for nearly 2 years now.
Yep.
It was November that we started recording together.
Start recording, and then we banked a bunch of episodes.
Yeah, we were just working on stuff, weren't we? We were just working it out. Isn't it wild that we've been doing this for nearly 2 years now?
Yep. Time passes when we get to our age. A lot
so
quicker.
Quickly.
Yep.
I can't. It's astonishing to me that we've nearly been doing this for 2 years.
Well, we're hopefully going to have a big episode for episode 100.
Oh, it's going to have to be something
big for
huge.
Us. There might be a lot of people who don't give a shit about the thing we're doing, but it's going to be big for us. And I think a very enthusiastic episode.
Well, this is, I mean, should we just tease episode 100 for a bit? And just give some backstory as to why this is so important to us.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it was. We've kind of told the story with other comics, but it was one that we were both reading while we were working at a place.
Yeah,
and we both kind of were talking about it as we were reading it.
Yeah,
which is a rare thing these days with comics, I think.
And if we want to tease it a little bit, if you want to go back to episode 1,
it relates to episode 1.
It relates to episode 1. Written by somebody that Ryan and I both think is just one of the best out there.
Who surprisingly we haven't done much of their work.
Well, because there's only really the one we did, the one we're gonna do, and a couple of others. He hasn't done that
because
much.
He's been doing this one for so long.
Yeah, and this is really his magnum opus, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this is one that really, this is one of the first comic books that I fell in love with. And it was one of the first that you and I really sat down and talked about. And I think when you came back to Norwich, it was us talking about comic books that you were like, oh, that could be a podcast, right?
Yep.
Just you and me sitting there in the pub shooting the shit, being like, did you read the last issue of whatever this comic book was? And we kind of had the same with Preacher and The Walking Dead. We talked about a lot and why, why The Last Man. But this was the big one, wasn't it? And so this is really the comic book that is the reason we do this, I think.
Because all those other comics we got through.
Yeah.
We read and completed, then talked about it. This one was still ongoing.
Yeah.
And then we just completely dropped off it. And now we have to make the arduous, but probably enjoyable climb back up the mountain to catch back up to it.
Because is it publishing again?
Yeah, still releasing. Yeah, they just released issue 69.
He had a huge hiatus, though, didn't he?
I think they take big breaks.
Yeah.
So it's I don't think it's one big break. I think it's a lot of breaks in between.
Oh, I thought he had like a 2 or 3 year hiatus.
Maybe I just always know that like long running comics, they'll always have like hiatuses.
Yeah.
Hiatusi might be the plural, but they have breaks in between because they normally do them by volume. So normally gets released as like the trade paperback. They'll do a couple of those and then those get released. And then it's like, we planned for those 4 volumes, let's say, which was like 40 issues. So that's like what, like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So they do that and they're like, we need to go away to actually like write the next one.
And this has been going for nearly a decade now, hasn't it?
Yeah, easily. Yeah. So that's why the catch-up's going to be a chore.
And again, it's one of those epics because the superhero stuff is cyclical. Batman's been running since the 50s, but not in the same 30s, sorry. Batman's been running since the late 30s, but not in the same guise. Whereas this is a continuous story that's been running for a fucking decade.
One of the closest things to the most successful mangas. If you think about it, of all Western comics, this is probably the closest. I mean,
that or The Walking Dead.
I was going to say, or Invincible. So Kirkman stuff, naturally. Yeah. I'm literally just found a Kirkman comic that I'm going to try. I haven't read any yet, but I just saw a title, and it was I'll find it now. It was a title that made me go, "Huh, what's that?" And I just clicked. I normally don't even like bother to look at it because I'm just trying to catch up with the stuff I'm reading now and like the superhero stuff. But so I was like, oh, what's that? And I had a look. It's called Firepower. And I had no idea why anything else brought me to it. I just saw the name Firepower and it was by Image Comics. And I see a lot of Image Comics names that I'm like, I don't have time to look at this. But I just clicked on it. I was like, what is this? And it's written by Robert Kirkman. And I was like, I should give this a try. Like, I should get on the ground floor of a Kirkman one. Like, this could be a 10-year plus like epic saga, and could get in while it's like still fresh, But yeah, so maybe I'll have that to talk about.
Just finishing that thought, after 2 years of doing this nearly, because 2 years will be episode 108, won't it?
Yeah. 104? 52? 104. Yeah.
Fuck me.
I mean, I agreed with you for a second there.
So episode 104 will be 2 years of releasing.
Yes.
But next month will be 2 years of recording.
Yes.
And then we're up to 100 episodes month after next.
Yeah, should be, yeah.
How do you feel after 2 years of doing this?
I think we're a lot better than when we first started.
Undoubtedly, yeah.
I think there's going to be a change coming up where, because we've had this talk about a little peek behind the curtains, but we tried to do a lot of tie-in stuff, things releasing, and there's not been enough of a boost from things to justify doing what ultimately, like, normally cash grab, like... Let's make a comic to cash in on this IP and let's just get anyone to write in who cares about the quality. Because noticing when we did those episodes that we just weren't enthusiastic about it.
Yes.
And it was kind of looking back then, I was like, we're not getting much extra from doing those. And we're just making worse episodes because, again, stuff we're not into. So we're definitely going to be limiting that. Yeah. Obviously, big superhero film releases are coming up in the next year, which we're going to be doing like big tie-ins for.
But a lot of those are stuff that you're quite passionate about the comics for anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Or at the very least is like an area which would be interesting to get into.
Yeah.
Like one thing I was thinking the other day, there's going to be a Fantastic Four film next year.
We've not done any Fantastic Four yet.
Not only that, I'm looking at like what's there to be like, what do we do? Not like there's too many good choices is what I mean. Do we do 60s Jack Kirby, which I saw? I'm making a video which uses a bit of that, it shows a bit of that art in the video, but I'm looking at this art, I'm like, for 60s, this is great art, like really vibrant stuff. Like the line work is very of its time, and not to say bad, but just looks very 60s as appropriate. But the coloring and the vibrancy of the colors, I'm like, the amount of like muted grade comics we read today, I'm like, look at this 60 years ago, like look how good they look. Do that now. Like again, like one of the prime examples of what did that really well was like 8 Billion Genies.
Like, it just looked so good, didn't it?
And they just got it right. Jack Kirby specifically, like one of the best artists Marvel or comics overall has ever had. So I'm looking at his stuff, I'm like, we could do some like prime vintage Fantastic
I'm so
Four.
up for that.
But the problem is, if I'm thinking about the best Fantastic Four I've ever read, it's easily Jonathan Hickman's run. Yeah. Which led up to Secret Wars, which is what they're doing in the Avengers films in the next couple of years. So now I'm like, well, we could do this, we could do this. And then I'm like, there's this other Fantastic Four. There's Fantastic Four being released right now.
Is it any good?
I personally dropped off it a bit. Yeah. But not through that. It's hard to describe. I would need like a second opinion on it. Yeah. But a lot of people really like it. Like it's really well received. And there's a lot of stuff I liked in it that at one point I was like, this is great. And then I got to where I was like, I'm not sure if I have the time. I'm not enjoying it as much now. Yeah. But now I'm seeing it again. I'm like, I maybe need to get back into it. So there's 3 options right there of like Fantastic Four. And then I was like, do we just do a month of Fantastic Four?
Like we did with Deadpool.
Exactly. And
which was an absolute bust.
Well, but here's the thing. Deadpool comics, I don't think has as much of a following as Fantastic Four comics. Deadpool, the character, is very well regarded, but I think that's more because of the films and that kind of following in the memes. Fantastic Four, like they barely had any films compared to other characters.
Old school hardcore comic book nerds, isn't it?
Exactly.
The people that are still reading Fantastic Four are engaged comic book nerds.
Exactly.
I mean, the real question is, what the fuck do you guys want to hear? like, what do you like? There are some of you now. What the fuck do you want us to talk about?
I mean, people have given us suggestions. We've been like, yeah, we weren't thinking of that, so maybe we'll get to it, but yeah. So bear that in mind.
Maybe at some point we should just do a whole month of suggestions.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the problem with the months is like, I want to be doing like the big comics that are releasing and everyone's talking about. Again, in lieu of the tie-ins for films.
I'm so much more interested in tailoring this to what's going on in the comic book world, not what's going on in the film world. And I think
comic book films.
The comic book film world kind of, to my mind, sits under the umbrella of the comic book world. Yeah. And I think I would agree that there have been points where we have been more focused on what's going on in the film world. Barbie is a really great example of that. Yeah. We did a fucking Barbie comic, Ryan.
Yeah, I would not, that comes under the umbrella of things I wouldn't do now. I'm glad we did it, but I think I've learned it a bit more to not do it now.
I'm glad we did it, and it's probably one of my favourite episodes.
Yes. But
again,
I don't think it would do well.
But we recorded that one on like a Saturday afternoon and had a really nice time making it, didn't we?
Yeah, of course, yeah. But yeah, I think Barbie should have made more comics, more modern comics where she's doing like more amazing stuff. Like,
mate, I would be so up for like a really great Barbie comic.
They're leaving money on the table by not making it.
I know.
And we've had this thing before where it's like a film's coming. I'm like, hey, we should do a tie-in. And I look and I'm like, how are there no comic tie-ins to this IP? Like, surely you just pay someone whatever it costs to make a comic and then you get a return because everyone else is doing it. I looked up one of the writers for Creature of Gillman's Return or whatever, and one of the guys I saw in his credits is like written some Dark Souls comics. I'm like, I would love to read those. I love Dark Souls comics. I don't know what the quality is going to be, but it's an IP that I've recognized and I'm into. So yeah, everyone, but there should be Barbie comics as well.
Didn't we do one for a video game at one point?
Fallout, yeah.
We did one for Fallout.
And there was only one comic for that.
There was like one issue, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was only this year.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing more comic stuff.
Oh, I think, I'm really excited to just, particularly as I'm now reading comics again. Like, I'm now actually just reading comics for pleasure again. Mostly manga at the moment. But yeah, and so as I'm becoming a more engaged comic book reader, I'm more excited about comics.
Yeah.
And so I'm fully with you. I'm way more excited to be talking about what's actually going on in the comic book world and not the point at which the film world kind of crosses into the comic book world for a hot minute.
Yeah. I'd tell you what's good as well, what's happening right now, which I was going to mention comic book news, is they're currently doing, so we've done some Ultimate Marvel stuff.
Yes,
right?
which is really good.
The benefit of that being that they are brand new stories. So you don't need all the lore and everything from whatever. And they're doing really well.
Yeah.
They are really selling really well. But what's now happening, possibly in response to, is DC are doing their version of this called the Absolute Universe.
So,
and they are just released an Absolute Batman, which is a brand new Batman
Is there any Dick Grayson?
It's going to be just the main Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman.
Because I really like Dick Grayson.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a while before they get to Dick Grayson in this. We can do more Dick Grayson. Like, that run is still going.
I definitely. So there's some things that I want to see more of. I want to see more Dick Grayson. I really want to do some Iron Man because we've never talked about Iron Man.
Yeah, we will need to do some Iron Man.
Fantastic Four I'm psyched for.
Yes.
I'm excited to maybe potentially do a bit more Thor.
Yeah, Immortal Thor we could pick back up on. That's been really well received.
Yeah, has it?
Yeah.
Is that Jonathan Hickman as well?
No, that was Al Ewing.
Al Ewing,
Immortal
of course
Hulk.
it was, yeah.
But very similar.
Hulk was good as well.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite superhero comics of the last easily last 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, really good stuff. But what's good about these new universes, again, is that they're just rebooting from start, so you don't need all the previous backstory.
Yes.
Also, Absolute Batman is built like a tank. So the joke now is Absolute Batman is an absolute unit.
I'll see if
I can find a picture, because it's just funny. But apparently it's really there's only one issue out so far, so we're going to obviously leave it a while before we do it. But it looks really interesting, like all the new stuff they're doing. Apparently he's not rich in this.
Cool.
At all. So
they've done that before, haven't they? The current run of Batman has him losing all his money, doesn't it?
He's lost all his money, but he also he lives in a brownstone in Gotham City, which is like New York. So he's still well off. He's not a billionaire, but also he's got all these resources. Like, I built this cave in the middle of the street just in case this ever happened.
He's still independently wealthy.
Yeah, but it's a different kind of thing. So this is Absolute Batman.
Oh, he is hench. That looks great. That looks pretty cool.
I tell you what it's kind of very reminiscent of is Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, because he was huge in that as well.
Yeah.
That's another comic we need to do at some point, because that will complete the trifecta of the ones that popularized the graphic novel name.
Watchmen,
Mouse, Dark Knight Returns.
Right.
So that will complete the trifecta. But we should leave it like whatever the time was between Mouse and Watchmen. We need to leave that between Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns.
I wish we'd saved Mouse.
Mouse could be one we return to. But then I think we did as podcasting, we were not as good at that. But I think we did as good a job for like talking about it as like serious, while also just not trying to make light of or anything, but also like trying to show how good of a comic it was.
How special it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Art Spiegelman did a fantastic job.
Yeah, and I'll never go over Art Spiegelman, The Simpsons with Alan Moore. It's absolute crazy. Nearly at the end, I think, of this. Shorter episode because we did not have as much, nearly not as much time on Gillman.
We talk about this a lot. Just you and I. A lot of our conversations IRL, when we occasionally get to have them, are about this project and how we feel about it and what's coming up and what's working and what isn't. It's nice to just catch some of that on the podcast. It's nice to just have a chat about it. I know it's a bit meta and a bit navel-gazy, but it's kind of nice to just do that with you.
Yeah, and also we are doing a comic book podcast, so talking about comic books and comic book films as a larger thing, I think is kind of part and parcel, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's better than last week we were talking about our histories of shaving, which was just 2 minutes, so...
My girlfriend's a regular listener, right? Thank you, darling. It's very sweet that you listen. And I was chatting with her and she went, oh yeah, the podcast came out today. So I sat and listened to it while I was like partying around and doing my jobs or whatever. And I was like, oh, was it any good? Because this comes out a week after we do it and I just completely forget what we talked about. And she went, yeah, talked about cum spirals a lot. And I was like, oh yeah, it was that episode. It was the cum spiral episode.
That's how you remember which one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, you went on a 20 minutes tangent about what a cum spiral would look like. And it's like, yeah, that sounds about right.
I'm trying to find the one last bit of like news for comic book films. The image released recently show it confirmation of a character who's going to be in the next Superman film.
Is that the dog?
That's Crypto the Super Dog.
But isn't Crypto Supergirl's dog, not Superman's?
I think it was Superman's first.
Was he?
Yeah. But obviously, he's part of that whole world, isn't he?
He's part of the Superman family.
Yeah, apparently he was going to be called Kryptonite originally, but then I think in universe they couldn't fit the name on like the thing on his neck, so they just shortened it to Crypto.
I like Crypto.
And that's why it's called Crypto. But yeah, Superdog. And Bat's got Ace the Bat Hound.
Does he?
There's actually a Super Pets film. There's like an animated Super Pets film of like the pets of the superheroes.
Is it any good?
I don't know. It was really, you look at like...
It's for kids.
Yeah, it's really aimed at kids. Could be good. We could do an episode on it at some point. But yeah, I think we've got a lot of interesting stuff coming up, and that's the main thing to get across.
Yeah, it's fun. It's exciting making it, isn't it?
Which is why if you're listening right now, you should tell everyone you know who likes comics or comic book films or is any kind of relation to this whatsoever. If they want to hear people shit on Gillman for almost an hour, check this episode out.
Or even if you just want to hear two people talk about something they care about while you're walking your dogs or taking a dump or doing your job.
Like, if your job allows.
I think,
or even if they don't.
I think this is quite cozy listening.
It depends what we're talking about. If we're just talking about like, I really liked it when this happened. And yeah. But when it's like, oh my Gillman, Jesus, I am.
I mean, again, like, I imagine the cum spirals conversation wouldn't make for great like nighttime listening.
Probably not. I mean, depends what you're doing at night. That's another podcast. That's a different podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Would a genuine serious question, would you like me to do the calls for action from now on?
No, because I don't like them.
But would you prefer me to do the thing that you don't like?
No, because I half-arse it because it's my disarming way of not doing it, right? Because
so you're hanging a lantern on it.
Yeah, because I don't think we need calls to action.
See, I think we make such a good product that I think people should tell everyone they know and recommend it to them to share our good work. And also to leave reviews for as well, especially 5-star, because then that helps us like in the algorithms and everything.
Can I just out of context?
Sure.
I think you should just cut the episode off at I think. And that's really funny.
I'll put in some silence, but then it'll come back. I'll put enough silence that they check the app to be like, wait, is this still... Oh, no, it's still got some time going.
I think we end on I think. That's the best ending. Like, an episode where we hang a lantern on the fact that I don't like doing calls to action is the one episode where we don't have to have any calls to action.
We'll put it to the editor. So for whoever's editing
You're
the
episode...
the editor! Whoever's editing the episode,
you do the
make
editing!
The creative choices and we'll see what happens in the end, yeah, okay? And also check them out on YouTube, Comic Stand, Gambit Video. Get it all the way to whatever... Let's beat Mr. Beast and all that.
You're allowed to plug your YouTube channel.
Oh, thank you, sir.
I think...
You honor me.
But like not every episode.
Just most. Just most.
Every episode of the YouTube channel, you have to plug the podcast, obviously.
Yeah, and vice versa.
No. This is the creative hub of the Comic Stan universe. This is like the central place where people come.
What if I just cut off what if the episode just cuts off right before you, and then just cuts off?
I mean, it needs to have an abrupt end.
Ding? Were you about to say? Ah,
you ruined it. I was trying to do the abrupt ending.
Yeah, freeze frame.
Bye.
Thank you, goodbye.